Picture a rifle that ejects its shells out the front instead of the side. Picture a shotgun with 2 magazine tubes that carries double the ammo of anything else on the market. Picture a pistol that fires 50 rounds without a single reload. These aren't concepts. They're real weapons that actually got made, actually got issued, and in some cases actually got forgotten. Today we're going through 14 of the strangest firearms ever designed, the ones that broke every convention their category had, and by the end you'll understand why some of them changed warfare forever, while others became nothing more than a YouTube thumbnail. Stick around, because number 7 is the reason an entire country's dense budget collapsed a rifle away from becoming the standard for its whole army. Let's start with something that shouldn't exist in the first place. A 50 caliber BMG rifle is supposed to be long, heavy, and worked with a manual bolt, because the recoil at that caliber is violent enough that nobody in their right mind wants to complicate the mechanism further. One company looked at that rule and decided to break it completely. They made it semi-automatic, then folded the entire weapon into a bullpup configuration to shrink the length down, which meant the internal links ended up shorter than anything else firing the same round. The trade-off was real though. With the mechanism more exposed, it became far more likely to fail from dirt and sand getting into places they shouldn't. It also demanded a lot more lubrication and maintenance than a standard rifle because of how complex that long recoil sliding barrel system actually is. A 50 cal that fires like a rifle half its size sounds incredible on paper, but the maintenance logs probably tell a very different story. Next is something that isn't even a weapon by itself, it's an attachment, and it might be one of the strangest ideas to ever get military funding. Think of it as a modern version of the curved barrel attachments Germany experimented with on the Sturmgewehr 44 decades earlier. This weapon physically bends in half. The rear section, the part with the trigger and grip, stays completely straight in the shooter's hands. The front section, the part with the barrel and a built-in camera, rotates up to 60 degrees in either direction through a hinge in the middle. A small screen on the back shows exactly what that camera is seeing in real time. That means you can aim and fire at a target you can't even see yourself, with only the bent front section poking out past the corner of a wall. Israel developed this in the early 2000s, and a handful of elite police and military units bought it, mainly for hostage rescue situations. But because it's expensive, heavy, and useful in an extremely narrow set of circumstances, it stayed rare. Now, here's a gun that most people think was invented by one company, when really it was copied from something older. Everyone knows the revolver that fires from the bottom chamber of the cylinder instead of the top. But that idea didn't start there. It started with an Italian revolver from the 90s, and this one actually goes a step further than its more famous descendant. The barrel lines up with the lower chamber instead of the upper one, which puts the bore almost directly in line with the shooter's wrist and cuts down muzzle rise after every shot. But this older design does something its successor never did. It's semi-automatic. Part of the recoil energy gets used to rotate the cylinder and recock the hammer on its own, so it's not a conventional single or double action revolver at all. It stayed limited to small, expensive production runs, but without it, one of the most recognizable modern revolvers wouldn't exist in the form we know it today. People either love this style of revolver or they hate it. Nobody seems to land in between. Sniper rifles usually have long stocks that extend well behind the shooter, and one particular Russian design took its own sniper rifle, kept the same barrel and the same ammunition, and compressed the whole thing into a bullpup layout by pushing the action and magazine behind the trigger. The result came out almost 30 centimeters shorter than the original without losing an inch of barrel length or downgrading the cartridge. The muzzle brake on the front is huge and almost looks bolted on as a separate piece, and there's a reason for that. Bringing the muzzle that much closer to the shooter's face, which is exactly what happens in any bullpup design, means the blast has to be redirected away from the person holding it. This version even includes a full auto selector, which is unusual for a rifle built around precision shooting, and it was fielded with larger capacity magazines for moments when the shooter needed quick suppressive fire before going back to aimed shots. Russia built this in the 80s specifically for special forces operating in tight, enclosed spaces. It never replaced the standard sniper rifle across the regular army, but as a concept, it's one of the more interesting ones on this list. This next one was the thumbnail of practically every futuristic weapons video around 2015. Even the name sounds like something out of a movie. It has no barrel at all. This was a United States Air Force project that abandoned gunpowder completely in favor of a low-power laser beam housed inside a shell shaped to look like a standard rifle, close enough that anyone already trained on conventional weapons could pick it up and use it without relearning everything. The beam intensity was adjustable, and the goal was to cause temporary blindness and disorientation in a target at range without doing the kind of permanent damage a full-power military laser would cause. The program ran through the 2000s and never got close to full-scale production, mostly because that temporary blindness didn't always stay temporary. Sticking with the same era of thumbnails, here's something that isn't even a portable firearm, but it showed up in so many of those pictures that it deserves a mention. No bolt, no extractor, none of the moving parts a conventional weapon needs to cycle. Multiple projectiles get stacked inside the barrel itself, one behind another, each with its own separate powder charge, and they fire in sequence using electrical ignition instead of a mechanical firing pin. Because there are no moving parts between shots, the theoretical rate of fire in a multi-barrel setup exceeds 1 million rounds per minute. The catch shows up the moment the stack runs dry. Reloading means swapping out the entire preloaded barrel, not just refilling rounds, which works fine in a fixed defense installation and terribly in anything a soldier has to carry. American and Australian defense programs poured heavy investment into this through the 2000s, testing everything from portable versions to automated anti-air systems. It never became widely adopted equipment, but it absolutely did its part in making a few YouTubers famous. Now, for what might be the most radical design decision on this entire list. This rifle's ammunition has no casing at all. Powder and projectile get compressed into a single solid block with no metal wrapping around it whatsoever, which means there's nothing to eject. The next block just slides into the chamber after firing with nothing ejecting out the side. This is probably the boldest firearm concept that ever came close to actual military adoption. Caseless ammunition weighs a fraction of what a conventional cartridge for the same round count. And the rate of fire on burst that in theory the first 3 rounds would leave the barrel before the recoil from the very first one even reached the shooter's shoulder, making the entire burst feel like a single shot. West Germany developed this through the 70s and 80s and canceled the whole project in 1990 when the defense budget shrank after the wall came down. It wasn't a bad design that failed, it was a genuinely excellent rifle that got cut down purely by bad timing, and it's the closest thing on this list to what could have been Germany's standard service rifle. Every blowback weapon kicks straight back into the shoulder of whoever's holding it. This one doesn't. An internal mechanism redirects part of the bolt's energy downward before it reaches anywhere that matters, using an articulated piece that changes the angle of the movement entirely. The company that built this calls it their own internal recoil reduction system, and the chamber and barrel sit noticeably lower relative to the grip than any conventional submachine gun. It originally launched chambered in .45 ACP, a caliber that historically punishes the shooter with muzzle rise on full auto, and that rise is exactly what this system was built to cancel out without needing a massive compensator bolted to the end of the barrel. Everyone recognizes this weapon from video games, but its real-world footprint doesn't go much further than that. It was never adopted militarily at any real scale, limited mostly to police forces and special units in a handful of countries. The problem is simple: in police work, full auto-fire risks civilian casualties, and in large-scale military operations, burning through ammunition that fast just doesn't make practical sense. Here's a weapon where the magazine sits flat on top of the barrel, instead of underneath the grip like every conventional pistol or rifle. 50 rounds load in from the side, travel through a curved internal channel, and only rotate 90 degrees right at the front of the weapon before dropping down into the chamber one at a time. Belgium developed this in the 80s alongside a brand new cartridge built specifically to defeat body armor, small in size but fired at extremely high velocity. The idea was to give people who normally carried a pistol, as a backup, something far more capable, without handing them a full-sized rifle to lug around. It lost ground over time as personal defense weapons and submachine guns in general got overtaken by shorter rifles with better ballistics, but it still sold to dozens of countries after launch, and became famous as the default weapon of the bots in one of the most played shooters ever made. This next rifle X spent casings out the front of the weapon instead of the side, which sounds almost impossible until you see how it works. A tube runs above the barrel, carrying fired cases all the way to the muzzle before expelling them out the side from there. It looks strange, but it solves a real problem that plagues every bullpup rifle, where conventional side ejection throws hot brass right into the face of a left-handed shooter, or onto the arm of a right-handed one. This system works identically for both without swapping a single part, something most side-ejecting bullpups simply can't do without forcing the shooter to buy a separate conversion kit. But because it's expensive and visually unusual, it lost ground to more conventional modular rifle platforms and got sidelined in most modern conflicts. Interestingly, it has shown up in photos with mortar teams in an active conflict zone, which makes sense because carrying a big rifle everywhere gets exhausting when your primary job is hauling a mortar tube, so a compact rifle instead of a full-sized platform becomes genuinely useful gear. A translucent magazine body doesn't sound like much today, but at the time it launched, it was a real innovation. A soldier could see exactly how much ammunition was left without pulling the magazine out and exposing themselves in the process. Austria launched this rifle in 1977 with a pistol grip in place of a conventional handguard and a low-power optic built directly into the receiver from the factory, meaning no separate rail was ever needed. It's a bullpup, so the mechanism sits behind the trigger, shortening the overall length without cutting into barrel length at all. Austria adopted it as their national service rifle, and Australia and Ireland followed. The factory optic came from one of the best optics manufacturers in the world, which was a genuinely bold choice for an infantry rifle. That combination makes this one of the only bullpup designs that actually succeeded long-term, and it's still in service today, with newer variants continuing to roll out. Shotguns typically hold one magazine tube, but this one runs two parallel tubes underneath the barrel, 7 rounds of 12 gauge in each, switching between them through a selector. A Turkish company launched this around 2010 with an almost entirely polymer body, but early reliability issues and a high failure rate kept it from gaining real military traction. On the civilian side, though, the pitch of a 12-gauge shotgun holding 14 rounds without a single reload proved appealing enough that it sold surprisingly well. An American manufacturer took a similar approach and built their own version with 2 parallel magazine tubes under the barrel, 7 rounds of 12 gauge in each, switched with a small lever near the trigger. 14 shots total in a weapon barely over 60 centimeters long, shorter than any conventional combat shotgun, while carrying double the ammunition. It launched in 2011 from a small independent company standing next to giants in the shotgun market, and it still became genuinely famous, largely from video games and from its appearance in the first John Wick film. The same company that built that shotgun also built one of the strangest pistols on this entire list. It uses the exact same magazine system from that earlier Belgian personal defense weapon, seated flat on top of the body just like the original. Except now it's shrunk down into a pistol. 50 rounds of that same high-velocity, armor-piercing cartridge in a weapon small enough to hold in one hand, although the weight of a full magazine sitting up top changes the balance considerably compared to any conventional pistol. This launched in 2022, decades after the rifle that inspired it, taking the same lateral feed concept and compressing it into something dramatically smaller. It's essentially that original weapon shrunk down to pistol size, using literally the same magazine component from the platform that inspired the entire idea. And finally, a submachine gun with a thin folding stock and no conventional handguard at all, practically just a rectangular block of polymer with a barrel sticking out the front. A Russian company developed this in the 2000s with protection details and urban policing specifically in mind. The magazine holds 44 rounds, or 20 in a shorter version, chambered in either standard 9mm or a hotter Russian round designed for better penetration. The stock is optional, a thin wireframe piece that plugs in only when needed, since the weapon works completely fine fired one-handed without it. Russian federal security units adopted it, along with smaller export quantities elsewhere. Many versions came with a built-in suppressor, and the front handguard piece doubles as a spare magazine holder or a flashlight mount. 14 weapons, 14 completely different ways of breaking the rules everyone else followed. Some of them changed what a category of weapon could even look like. Others ended up as nothing more than a striking thumbnail and a few minutes of screen time in a video game. If you made it this far, let me know in the comments which one of these you genuinely want to see in person, and if you want a deeper dive into any single weapon on this list, tell me which one and it might become its own video. Thanks for watching all the way through, and I'll see you in the next one.